people have noticed that the issue of irresponsible tax behaviour. Now, it's no surprise when you see the number of headlines, but you get 2/3 of people saying that they don't think business pay the amount of tax that they should, and even more depressingly, they think that business don't care.
There is a great disparity between what companies might perceive as their organisation of tax affairs and how they are perceived by the public. And for any consumer-facing business, that's potentially a large problem if customers' behaviour is driven by their perceptions.
The range and nature of risks that will face companies to do with their tax practices will really vary according to the type of organisation and the sector it's operating in. So if you look, for example, at a company in the extractive sector, for them, kind of managing their tax affairs in a responsible way might be to do with their ability to continue to win licences from host governments. For a more consumer-facing company, then reputational risk might actually be a factor.
There's a challenge for businesses here that's about their own individual behaviour, but also the industry behaviour and the business community in general taking responsibility for this, because it does have knock-on effects on individual brands.
Probably the most important thing for companies which are consumer-facing is the question of, do their customers respond to them differently and react differently because of what those customers perceive about tax? And that must be a big issue for anyone who is in the press unfavourably for their tax affairs, whether it's right or wrong. For those companies, the question for them is, if they have fairly or unfairly received a reputation for being irresponsible in their tax affairs, what can they do to change that?
I think there are a number of risks that could affect a company because of poor conduct or perceived poor conduct in relation to corporation tax. The first is obviously a general damage to its brand and its reputation, but there's more to it than that. And I think investors are increasingly interested in the corporate conduct of businesses and how they approach tax. So, for example, those investors are watching public opinion and know that legislatures and regulators, politicians, will change the rules and change the laws in response to what public opinion is. So for an investor, a company that takes a particularly responsible approach to its taxes would be a low risk. In other words, there is little opportunity for value to be eroded through new rules, new laws.
When we're looking at it as investors, so we're wanting companies to engage in a certain amount of tax planning, so we don't want them to be paying more tax than they have to, but concerns do arise where they're undertaking perhaps particularly artificial or aggressive tax optimization strategies, and they're the ones where they're operating a little bit closer to where they're open to challenge by regulations. So if a particular arrangement was deemed unacceptable or regulations were to change, then you've got a potentially very material financial risk of future earnings on their valuations.
I think there is an issue about employees and the way in which employees are proud of or feel connected to the ethics and the values of the companies that they work for. I think that a particularly aggressive company with a big brand that gets caught for not paying taxes won't make the employees feel particularly great about working for them.
There's a really interesting interaction here where it's not so much a hygiene factor. It doesn't seem like a hygiene factor because brands that don't behave well on tax can still be well thought of, but there does seem to be a halo effect around it, and that can work in both directions for whole industries because people don't have perfect knowledge on the behaviour of individual companies.
I think a lot of it does come down to transparency. So we see a drive across all the different factors of how a company might interact with society and the environment. We see a drive towards transparency and consumers and other stakeholders really expecting this increased disclosure.
I think a lot of people who campaign for responsible tax do so for the very laudable reason that if companies feel that someone is watching them, there is a sense that they might behave more as those people watching them might want them to behave. And so for many groups that is a very important factor. But I don't think it can be a substitute for having good tax law in the first place, because many businesses have much less interaction with consumers and the public public is much less aware of them. And I think most people would want corporation tax to work for all companies, not just those that are consumer facing.
We are quite concerned about the broader kind of risks to society. So this kind of notion, I hesitate to say kind of paying your fair share, because I think fair share is a bit of a loaded concept, but of corporations having a responsibility to support the social infrastructure that they themselves rely on. So I think there's a whole range of different perspectives that you can look at this lens of tax risk from.
It's not sufficient to have responsible tax behaviour to be some kind of differentiator. The real differentiator comes from identifying a purpose that you want to serve in the world, identifying something bigger than simply selling product or whatever that you are existing to serve, and then finding ways to allow people to buy into that purpose and develop that kind of relationship with you rather than simply buy from you.
Responsible conduct, whether it's in tax or if it's just good conduct, good behaviour, good ethical values by a business, whether there is a direct business benefit, is what I call the holy grail. The truth is that there isn't clear evidence that customers vote with their feet towards good conduct. There is a little bit of evidence that they vote with their feet away from bad conduct and bad behaviour, but it's not overwhelming. But in all honesty, if that's the only reason in which you undertake your business in an ethical and socially responsible way, it's not really the point. The point is what do you stand for as a company? And what is your connection to the society that you serve? And how are you really listening and putting the interests of your stakeholders first?